So I'm Dan, that's Jan, and with our partner Sean, we're Premium Quality Consulting. And we study coffee brands, we count coffee brands, we catalog them, we're kind of in love with them, we're fascinated by them. They're, for us, a kind of text to study. We're both, Jan and I are both terminal liberal arts students before coffee. And so what we'd like to do today is share with you a little bit of what we've been looking at recently as we catalog coffee brands. One of the things that we've been focused on recently is trying to understand these terms, first wave, second wave, third wave. These are used by all of us, or a lot of us, and I have to say that I didn't quite understand what they meant, and we were in a position where we were able to try to find out. And so we should probably say we're also probably products of the second wave. Jan and I both started in coffee back during what would be the second wave. So just to kind of give our perspective, we tried to be nonpartisan about our analysis along the way. What we did, and I'll say, what I'm going to do is set up the data and just show you how we counted, and then Jan's going to talk a little bit about what we think it means. There's a lot to say. We're going to give you a flyby of this data. We would really like to engage anyone who's interested in more conversation. We think that this is fascinating and there's a lot to say. We're going to go really fast past this stuff. There'll be opportunities to talk about it more another time. To do this study for this particular focus, we looked at 1,397 coffee brands. Now, coffee brand for us is any coffee that's roasted and packaged and sold, or even given away. And for this study, we focused in North America, and just in the US and Canada. We also had a few, what we call European influence brands, because when you tell the story of the waves in North America, you have to talk about those brands. Before we go any further, though, I'd like to just talk about the etymology of these terms, first, second, and third wave. And I really tried to figure this out. The best I can tell, Tim Castle coined the term, along with Christopher Lee, back in 2000 in one moment. And then Trish Rothgeb and Nicholas Cho. I am sorry if you're in the audience and I'm getting this wrong. Tell me later if this isn't exactly right. But Trish and Nicholas kind of claimed the term. The definition has shifted over time of exactly which term refers to which part of history. I'd definitely say that Trish and Nicholas kind of planted the flag of of the way we use these terms now. And then there's a moment in 2008 where Jonathan Gold in LA Weekly, it was a good moment where the term third wave is being used in the public discourse. So it's become more than an industry term, but a way for people to describe what's happening in the industry. What we did to look at these brands is we took themes that we think are required, or let's say influential on every coffee company, and we looked at how those themes were reacted to or dealt with by the different brands over time, right? And so we looked at the text of these brands, the tropes, the images, the way they talk about themselves. We actually did look at the about pages on every website for all these brands. I should also say the brands we're looking at still exist. We didn't look at any brands that are gone, right? So, and what we found is interesting. I'm going to go really fast. There's a lot on here. What you see here are images that are meant to represent the common tropes and language and imagery of each wave as it's dealing with each subject. And then also on the keyword search part on the right, we actually looked at how many times different brands use different words, and I think that can be sometimes very informative. Again, I'm going to go fast and fly by because we can just give you a little introduction. We can talk about this a lot more later. When you think about the concept of origin, when you look at the first wave, it's not a surprise that origin is treated like a commodity. The places where coffee is described to come from are not described at all, or they're described in very general terms, in sort of mythical terms. The Isle of Java, right? Or mountain grown, which is a very unspecific pointing to location. In the second wave, those places are more specific, but they're also blended together. Blending, of course, is an important theme in the second wave. And then by the third wave, there's what we would call single origin supremacy, a concern with knowing where things are exactly. And you can see, for instance, in the word source or sourcing, just the bottom there, that there's a change in the use of the language as you look at the way these brands talk about themselves. More third wave brands talk about sourcing. If we shift to product, another theme that's inherent or found in every coffee, the product is shifting as well over time. Let's say that the one way to describe the first wave approach to the product is democratic. It's accessible, it's easy, it's simple, a lot of people can understand it. Again, we're talking about the North American brands here. By the second wave, we could describe it as populist. Let's say that's one of the major themes of the second wave. There's certainly more there. And by the third wave, we could also say that it's claimed to be sophisticated or is sophisticated. So again, there's a shift of language and tropes that are happening there. If we shift to quality, the idea of good changes over time. The definition of what is good changes over time. In the first wave, good is described with words that aren't very specific. Premium, right? Which is also in our title, Premium Quality Consulting. Desirable, the finest coffee you can buy. By the second wave, the idea of good shifts to the pursuit of consistency, of perfection, rule-driven, trying to find the Platonic form of coffee, in a way. And then by the third wave, the shift is to purity, a release from rules of the past and really approach to allowing the coffee to speak for itself. And you can see this shift in the language. The word consistent, for instance, is used in the first wave more than other waves, which I think is interesting. We look at flavor, you can see the same kind of shift from generic to specific. Through transformation, here in the second wave, flavor, which in the first wave is unspecific or very general, tasty, rich and flavorful. Not sure what that means, but it's a term that is used on a lot of coffees in the first wave. Then flavor is described using transformational terms. Roasting is important in the second wave. Of course, blending, adding foreign flavors or flavors that are not inherent to the coffee. That's another quality of the second wave. And then, of course, referring to some of the origins of the culture, like Italian, is something you find in the second wave. And then by the third wave, we have super descriptors, this incredibly specific flavor notes that are called out. I've often wondered why there's always three. If you look at every brand, there's always three, and I call it the trinity of descriptors, as if there's only three flavors. I'd like to talk to someone about why that always happens. We looked at the offer. This shifted as well. So you've got a move from a simple offer to expansive and to focus. What we've done here is actually showing you some actual data. We counted 58 brands in each and looked at the SKU offering. When you look at the second wave in general, there's actually usually much larger selection. The black bags indicate blends, and the white bags indicate single origins. If we could go back to the 90s, I think we'd find less single origins also on offer in the second wave. What we see in the third wave is a tightening of focusing, like the language, to a less expansive offer. And we'll just do a couple more. There's preparation, where the process has moved from convenience to a process-driven approach to preparation, trying to find rules, trying to find methodology, leading to systems. And then by the third wave, those rules, some of which were rejected by the third wave, are embodied in the baristi that run the cafes. Here I'd say that there's a kind of Protestantism to the Catholic old wave. There's a kind of priesthood of the believer in the modern day barista, right? As opposed to the sort of papal scripture that's handed down by the companies, the coffee companies. That's a metaphor that I think is applicable. In terms of worldview, this has also shifted over time. You see the first wave focused on ideas of tradition, things like family, the way it's always been done, the place we came from, right? That moved through, in terms of worldview, the famous third place. You can see some Starbucks brands, locations mapped there. A third place, which is really every place in a lot of ways now, and really has embedded our culture, and now is focused on community, really tying in the third wave the whole supply chain to the local place, to creating a cafe as local that's also tied to international. And then finally, as we go through these themes that apply to different coffees, we end up with values, which have moved from mainstream to transparent. So where this leaves us is with clear proof that, or we think, a pattern of difference between these brands. And then what we did is went back to the coffee brands themselves and tried to say which are which. And so we come up with this mix from our 1,391 brands, this mix of brands, first wave, an equal number of second and third wave, 21 European invasion brands, and then some brands that just don't express enough to be put in one category or another. I'll just show you one graph and then turn it over to Jan. Here's the full history. We can focus in a little bit here from 1958. At the top, you've got the cumulative brands. Again, these are brands that still exist, that still are around. And you've got, you can see where the waves start, right? On the bottom, these are brand starts. These are per year how many brands start. You can actually see the peaking of the second wave in orange and then the growth of the third wave. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jan to talk a little bit about what it might mean.
Thank you, Dan. Coffee is a powerful cultural force. People can really identify with their coffee in a very strong way. And what they want from coffee changes over time. And we believe that this change happens in a predictable way. A coffee wave is like an art, literature, or fashion movement. It's based on ideas, on what we think and believe and understand at a particular time. And it manifests itself in what we wear, what we like to read, how we paint, and how we drink our coffee. I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples in a different metaphor. We'll take painting. First, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm not an art historian, but I am married to an artist. So we're going to look at realism first. This is Edward Hopper in 1942. He captured in this painting the feeling of wartime isolation. This was something that was happening at that time. The feeling of loneliness, even when you're with people. The harsh fluorescent lighting was captured there, another detail to make it feel very real. You can practically smell the coffee burning. Our next ism is abstract expressionism. This is in 1950. Jackson Pollock threw out the boundaries and regulations of realism and made the line no longer defining a shape, just put it out there. He splattered, splashed, took trowels and smeared paint. He used dried up old paint brushes and sticks. And what he did was he released motion. He added emotion. And there's literally not a place for your eye to rest on this painting. So if Jackson Pollock was emotionally hot as a painter, our next painter, Agnes Martin, part of the minimalist movement, was detached and contemplative. You have to stare at this painting for 5 minutes before you see anything. So we see realism, abstract expressionism, minimalism. All of these paintings happened within about 10 years of each other. And each of these movements still exists. But none of this would have been possible without the work that came before, the work that each movement reacted to. Let's look at this in our coffee data. In 1993, we see that the second wave peaked. That's the orange line. And after that, brand starts declined. But we can also see, when the second wave peaked, the third wave was already starting. The third wave that rejected the second wave's reverence for the blend and rejected the second wave's recipe of 7 grams and rejected the populist tendencies that were growing in the second wave. The third wave gave us a new definition of coffee quality. They took us to the origin. They allowed us to taste these special coffees outside of the blend and really understand them. And they reintroduced an old method of brewing, the pour-over, that would reveal these flavors for us in a way that was really meaningful. Now, something interesting happened between 2009 and 2013 in the third wave. We had 2 years of brand declines and then a second acceleration. We studied this period very carefully. We looked at all the brands before 2010 and all the brands after 2010 because we wanted to understand what was going on. And we saw that those two groups of brands are quite different. And they were different enough that we felt the need to call them out. So we call that second acceleration in the third wave the tidal wave. The tidal wave is the millennial reinvention of coffee. Not so much a reaction to the third wave as a refinement of the third wave. So the journey to origin suddenly becomes a personal adventure. Pursuing the agricultural product for transparency now goes to the farm, the farmer, the microlot, the community. We see in the tidal wave a real stridency in the rules. Quality has gotten very finely defined. You can see it in the lighter roasting that is in respect to the natural product at origin, but also has the goal of keeping the product in the cup as close to what nature intended as possible. Now, when you see stridency in your efforts, and you see a narrowing of the definition of quality, and you see that even the offer has gotten quite small, maybe only 3 or 4 SKUs a coffee brand will put out now. It seems to suggest this pattern of change that we've been talking about. Orthodoxy, reaction, new ideas, status quo, orthodoxy, and again, reaction. And we believe that the tidal wave represents the codification of third wave values as the ruling values in coffee. Now, political and literary theorists would call it hegemony. We would call it coffee orthodoxy. And we ask ourselves, if orthodoxy doesn't set the table for change, a punk rock song, a splatter painting, a new kind of coffee. But we don't just see orthodoxy setting up change. We also see balance. All of these waves still exist, just like the movements in art. They all coexist. The second wave is still strong. And the new trends that the third and tidal wave have brought us have reshaped our ideas of what coffee is, and large multinational companies are shifting their strategies to add a third wave offer, and even to look a little more third wave. Coffee changes, but it doesn't change because a big coffee company decides it's time to change. Coffee changes because consumers change. And consumers change because ideas change, either generationally or because of large external factors. We believe that within this coexistence, there is change that will come. But we also believe that even though coffee's very big business, the experience is very small, personal, 1 cup at a time. And when change comes, it will be the small roasters and the small cafes that have the advantage over the big companies. Because they're local, they're nimble, They're connected to their consumers. They're inventive. They have the ability to adapt. So when will coffee change again? Well, we don't know because the consumer hasn't told us yet. But it will. And maybe a better question for all of us who care deeply about coffee to ask is, how will we maintain relevance over time in this dynamic marketplace? Again, we think you need to know your consumer. You need to engage with your customer, and you need to educate yourself on the new consumer, the one who might be ready to react to the status quo. Thank you.